The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Writing is a great challenge and a lengthy process. It takes a lot out of us. When we write, we're on a journey. We can't always see the end, although we're always working towards it.
Yeah.
So in that way, writing is a pilgrimage.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Lisa Deam is an art historian with a specialty in the medieval era. As she delved deeper into medieval art and history, she says, she discovered that the time period spoke to her as a Christian even more than as a scholar. Her new book is 3,000 Miles to Jesus. It's about the pilgrimages that medieval Christians took to Jerusalem and other holy sites, and how the pilgrimage serves as a model for all spiritual seekers. Lisa Deam, thank you so much for being on the Habit Podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So your book is called 3,000 Miles to Jesus. Remind me of the subtitle.
Pilgrimage as a way of life for spiritual seekers.
Okay. All right. And so I learned so much about medieval. I mean, I knew that people did pilgrimages, of course, in the Middle Ages. But I loved. It hadn't occurred to me that there was one route that everybody in Europe took, that you get to Venice, I guess, however you get to Venice, and then you sail over. I guess I just kind of imagined they were going in all sorts of,
Well, it became kind of codified like that in the later Middle Ages.
And so that path that ultimately became codified for you becomes a way of talking about our life as pilgrimage, and so I want to hear about that. Tell me, when you describe this book to people, what do you tell them?
Well, I tell them that the book follows primarily 3 pilgrims who set out on an amazing journey in the 1400s to Jerusalem, and that this book invites us to travel along with them. So the book is structured as a journey because I really wanted it to be more of an experience and not just a series of lessons. Mm-hmm. So we take the journey with them from their preparations through all the challenges and the different routes they went to, all the way until they reach their destination. And as we travel with them, we learn that great truth that you mentioned, that all of life is a pilgrimage.
So how did writing a book is a long process,
yes,
a challenging process, a kind of pilgrimage. How did the idea of pilgrimage get you through the process of writing this book?
Well, as it turns out, one of my favorite quotes about writing actually frames it as a pilgrimage. So a friend of mine who is a Benedictine oblate said, writing is a slow pilgrimage whereby, as we walk with our hands, our fingers bleed. And I think that's a marvelous quote, the slow pilgrimage where our fingers bleed. And I think that speaks to the fact that writing is a great challenge and a lengthy process. It takes a lot out of us, like, our fingers bleed. When we write, we're on a journey. We can't always see the end, although we're always working towards it.
Yeah.
So in that way, writing is a pilgrimage. But I don't want to just hit the challenging parts, like how did I get through it? Because writing is tough, but also a joy. I think it takes a lot out of us, but like a pilgrimage, it gives a lot to us. And one thing that I love about pilgrimage and writing is that I was able to write this book because pilgrims who came before wrote about their journeys. So I'm, in a sense, writing about their writing.
Yeah.
And if you notice, pilgrims, I think of all ages, seem to feel an urge to write about their experiences.
Yeah.
Like if you look at all the books we have today on people's experience on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, for example. And I think that when pilgrims write about their experience, this urge, it seems to be a desire to help those that come after.
Yeah.
I love that. It's like providing signposts. And it can be done in different ways. In the earlier Middle Ages, a pilgrimage travel account might just be really bare bones. It might just be a series of place names, cities, and the distance between them. That might be all it is.
Yeah.
And in the later Middle Ages, the pilgrims I wrote about in my book fleshed it out a lot more and provided their personal experience and a lot of travel tips. But in cases, they're writing for people who came after them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think in many ways, I think that's what writing in general is all about.
Yeah. That's great. I love that idea that all writers, like so many pilgrims, are writing for the people who come after them and saying, here's where I've been. Here's what I've seen on my journey. And of course, the people who come after will see some of the same things, but we'll see some other things too, right?
Oh, yes. But it's writing is, I think, providing signposts for those who come after. All kinds of writing, fiction, nonfiction.
Yeah.
Or writing for others.
Yeah. I love it. One thing I thought about as I was reading your book and thinking about writing as a pilgrimage, one thing you are very clear about is the challenges on the path that come in the middle. And writing a book length work, it's exciting to start and it's thrilling to finish, but then you got that whole middle. And your pilgrims that you write about, not too long after they leave home, they're faced with the Alps. They have to get over the Alps one way or another. And then they get to Venice and the ship that takes them across the Mediterranean, who knows when it's going to leave. And there's all this uncertainty in the middle and difficulty in the middle. And that seems, let's just talk about that a little bit.
The long middle.
The long middle. That's right. Yeah. In writing, so much of the time you're just in the middle.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the whole thing's the middle.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have to say that I really actually love the writing process. And I there is a long middle, but writing and seeing it come together, it's hard, but for me, it's like a spiritual practice, actually. Where I'm like working out my faith and really working out what I believe. And I was actually, grieving a little bit when I was done that particular journey was over.
Yeah.
So I want to say what a positive, I mean, I really do love it, even the tough parts, but yes, when you're, I like that connection you make. When you're writing, you do have to get over the Alps, or you may have to wait in Venice, or just, wait a long time. And what pilgrims did that helped them, one thing, was to focus on their destination, their goal. Mm-hmm. So one of the mystics I write about that helps spiritual pilgrims says, say to yourself, I want to be in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Tell your enemies, those thoughts in your head or your inner critic, tell them to go away. Yeah. And say to yourself, I want to be in Jerusalem. Yeah. So just to focus on your destination as a way to give you hope. Not that it necessarily magically makes it easier. Right. But it gives us that longing we need.
Yeah. And I think it's, and the only way to get to Jerusalem is to, the only way through it is through it. Right.
The only way.
Yeah. But, and one thing I want to, now I can't remember where in the book I'm getting this from, but the idea that on the one hand, I know I'm going to Jerusalem. I know the destination, but on the other hand, you kind of don't know, right? I mean, there's that prayer from Thomas Merton that you quote.
Yes.
I wrote it down. Lord, I have no idea where I'm going. I cannot see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end.
Yeah. And
embracing that uncertainty in the process of, right. I mean, I know Thomas Merton wasn't talking about writing, but and I don't want to turn your whole book into writing tips, but I am interested in these ideas as they relate to writers, because I know for me, I need to have some general idea. I won't start a big project unless I have an idea of where I'm going. But also, once I get in the middle, I realize I didn't know where I was going.
Yes.
and to embrace that and to be willing to, what's the word I'm looking for? To be willing to not just accept, but embrace that truth, really leaves me open to write something better than I had in mind, than what I had in mind at the beginning.
Oh, I agree with that, both for writing and the spiritual life, that it's one of the paradoxes or tensions of pilgrimage that I've learned to embrace, which is we do know where we're going, at least in life, but at the same time, we don't know. As Thomas Merton said, I have no idea where I'm going. And that it is a tension, and I used to want to really try to resolve that tension, but that's what the path is, and you don't know. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes everyone's path also be different and unique. It's not like it's a formula.
Yeah.
But to embrace the uncertainty in writing too. I'm a big outliner. I just like to have things, really set out. But even, and in this book, I had it pretty set out because I knew I wanted to follow Pilgrim's Journey step by step. So I had the structure. I want to follow them to Jerusalem every step of the way. But I was still surprised in the middle. There were plenty of surprises. I ended up adding a chapter that I hadn't planned. There's always a surprise. And I think we do right to find out what we want to say or to wrestle with our faith, and that we don't always know where it's going to go. Yeah,
right. A map is a very different thing from a journey. Right. When you any journey can be diagrammed on a map, but that's very different from seeing the mountains or facing the robbers or whatever it is that happens on that journey.
Right. You don't know when you're right there. You can't see over the Alps.
Yeah. Yeah. If I remember correctly, you quote Augustine, and I may be misquoting Augustine when I say, everywhere I go, my desire is taking me there. My longing is taking me there. And so that notion of reminding yourself, I want to be in Jerusalem is, again, it is my desire. It's my longing that takes me, whether it's taking me, by the way, down the wrong path or the right path, it's my desire that's taking me there. And I think that's so important for not just writing, a realization that's not just important for writing, but for everything else.
Yeah.
One thing you say about these pilgrims is that they're really inefficient, and they embrace inefficiency. And what do you mean by that?
Okay. Well, what I mean is, if we think about the way that we want to travel today, for example, since we're talking about journeys, unless it's a specific kind of trip, but if we have a destination, we usually want to get there as quickly as we can, and usually with a very direct route.
Yeah.
So we don't want a holdup. We don't want a detour. We don't want a delay. We want to get there. And a pilgrimage, by contrast, it twists, it turns, it stops, it pauses. It cannot be rushed.
Yeah. I was in the Dallas airport yesterday, and I went through the TSA line for trainees, and they said, this is going to take a little, this is going to take longer. But if you're, I'd gotten there early, and I said, yeah, fine, whatever. And I went through it, and it took them, probably 10, 15 minutes to get me through security. And it was really strange. And I just read your book a couple of days earlier, and I was thinking about, how frustrating that inefficiency was, but it was only 10 or 15 minutes. And I think Marjorie of Kemp, am I saying her name right?
Marjorie Kemp.
Was stuck in Venice for, I don't know how many months before her ship.
3 months. For her ship again.
but again, that inefficiency, that's where the real action is, right? I mean, that's where you are forced to slow down, and as our that's where life comes to us. I think we're so desirous of control and efficiency that we ignore the fact that that's where life comes to us, in those places that we are out of control, and we're slowing down. And again, at the risk of turning everything into a writing lesson, it is those moments of inefficiency where that's where story ideas come from. It's where you're an academic, and you remember, or you're conscious of the difference between Googling for information and wandering through the stacks to find information.
Oh,
I felt like most of my education was just me getting to the book I was looking for and getting interrupted by, oh, that looks interesting, and reading two pages out of a book. And then, the great thing about Google is it gets you right there. And the terrible thing about Google is that it gets you right there.
It's I miss that so much, wandering through the stacks.
Yeah.
And there's a difference. I think there's a difference between being efficient and being productive or getting good work done.
Yeah.
I think that our culture wants us to equate those two.
Yeah. Well, okay. For one thing, efficiency assumes that I know where I need to be.
Right.
And if I were absolutely correct about where I needed to be at any given moment and what I needed to be doing, then efficiency really would be, more of an obvious good than it is. But the truth is, I don't know where I'm supposed to be.
Right. And one definition, when I was writing that part, I was sort of brainstorming, well, what do we think efficiency is? And one definition I found said, maximum productivity with minimum effort. And you don't want to waste time and effort. So be efficient.
Yeah.
But, I just almost hate the word, maximum productivity.
Yeah. Right.
Because I think I'm not really prolific as a writer, but does that mean I'm not productive? I don't think it means the same thing. Because,
what's the difference between prolific and productive?
Well, I think prolific is producing a lot of work in a minimum amount of time, probably. Or like these days, when your book comes out, like, my book is releasing February 2nd. You're supposed to have your next book proposal sent off. And I don't have my next book proposal ready. So I'm not prolific, but I think that that does not mean I'm not productive.
Yeah.
So like you said, I mean, I don't always know where I want to go, and I don't want to force that. It takes a long time for me for ideas to steep and to develop. And when they finally do, then they take me somewhere good, I think.
Yeah.
And even when, as a writer, we're waiting for that, or we're daydreaming, or we're wandering the stacks, maybe without a totally clear purpose, then I think that is productivity.
Yeah.
But it's just not efficient.
Yeah. Well, I also, are you familiar with Cal Newport's book, Deep Work?
No, I'm not.
It's a great book. And I think the idea of his work, of that book, is that if you can stop, wasting your time on things that actually are a waste of time, like, checking Facebook constantly and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like a superpower in this culture. It's a superpower if you can resist electronics. And so he is actually very prolific in terms of the amount of work he puts out. But I think one idea of deep work is getting rid of all that waste, stuff that really is a waste, so that you can have time to sort of waste on wandering around in the stacks or whatever.
No, I do believe that. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I would be a little more prolific and probably a lot more deeply productive if I got rid of that waste.
Yeah. Right. But the leisure to wander the stacks or to read another book, maybe not read more articles on the internet.
Yes.
That wandering is, and I know pilgrimage and wandering aren't the same thing, but the embrace of the inefficiency of acknowledging I don't necessarily, I need to be open to the world,
right,
and wander around just a little bit.
Yes,
to
and
see what happens.
I don't have to get that next thing done this second. Yeah, I think both as in the Christian spiritual life and in something like writing or work, that I think inefficiency is a virtue.
Yeah.
Like you said.
You mentioned in your book the slow writing revolt, and it's something I've heard of, but I don't really know what that is. Can you tell me more about that?
Well, I first read about that. I don't know how much literature there is on that, but I remember reading a blog post by the wonderful writer Leslie Leyland Fields. It was a little while ago, who had a post entitled Slow Writing Revolt. And then I heard a panel on that, slow writing and slow reading, at the Festival of Faith and Writing. And that was a handful of years ago. But it really spoke to me, because it gets back a little bit to what we were just saying about letting your ideas steep, letting yourself wander a little bit through your ideas, and making sure that it is what you want to say, instead of feeling the pressure to come out with something on the next hot topic or before you're ready. So, in a blog post, if you're throwing out a blog post, maybe that's different. Although maybe it's not.
I'm not sure it is.
If all you're feeling is pressure to get something out there, then I think she was saying maybe it's better to not pause and think, because it's not helping your writing.
This idea that we are all called upon to comment on every hot topic. I mean, even that phrase, hot take, which I can't ever decide. Some of the people use that ironically more than unironically, but I do think there have been times, in the last few years, where the idea of hot take was something we should all be shooting for, or something. I don't, again, it's so, just the phrasing of it though seems to tell us not to take it seriously.
Yeah, that's true. Hot take, not thought through.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No deep ideas here. And I have tried to do that several times, and I'm not really good at it. And partly it's because like the slow writing revolt, that really struck a chord, partly because I think, yes, that's right on. But also I think that I'm a slow writer in the slow writer movement, just maybe by accident, because I don't jump on the bandwagon that quickly. So I remember trying to write on the Da Vinci Code, from an art historical or spiritual perspective, but it was just a little bit too late. I didn't jump on it fast enough because my ideas were still forming. And by then there had been, 60,000 hot takes on that. So it doesn't work especially well for me. I really am like a pilgrim. I'm a plotter. Yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad you're plodding along. Yeah. I know one of your areas of interest is contemplative prayer. And you have a website called The Contemplative Writer. So what's the connection between contemplative prayer? Well, I guess first you need to tell us what you mean by contemplative prayer. And then how is that relevant to the writing life?
Yeah. Well, to give a shout out to my friend Ed Szyzeski, a wonderful writer, he's the one who began the Contemplative Writer website. And
Thank
then I just want to, wow. And then I ended up taking it over.
Okay, got it.
So he could move on to other projects that he really wanted to. I love it. But we might define contemplative prayer. I like to think of contemplation as a whole kind of lifestyle, actually, and not just a time for prayer. But contemplative prayer is a non-wordy kind of prayer where you're kind of sitting in silence with God, or maybe your spiritual presence, but in the Christian tradition with God, and trying just to be in that presence without a lot of words. And as I talk, I'm thinking, well, maybe that is especially useful for writers because we deal with so many words that maybe it's good to have a time when we're not talking, to God. Maybe we can just sit with him and fill the well. And I think one of the other ideas is that, there's a long tradition in the Christian life of contemplation or prayer leading to action. Any kind of action. Is it social justice? Is it, any kind of spiritual work? And that you have to have the contemplation. Your action has to spring from a deep well. It can't come out of a void. And if it comes out of like a poisonous well, then it's not going to do your action or your good works or anything, any good. So it's like a grounding for what we do. And it is supposed to lead to something. But it's the idea that the contemplation, the filling the well comes first. And then that grounds us so that we remember why we're writing or why we're pursuing social justice or why even we're volunteering somewhere. And that things don't become toxic. And like for a writer, if we're not grounded in who we really are, maybe spiritually, and why we're writing, then we can get easily knocked off the path by things like comparison with other people, with the drive for success that like we talked about a minute ago, that lessens our ability to write well and wisely if we're so hung up on success. So that we have a grounding for our life.
That's good. I think it's so important for writers to remember that writing doesn't start with words.
Oh, yes. That's a beautiful way to say it. Yes.
Writing starts with reality, with our taking in reality. And then at some point finding the words.
Yeah. But you are right. Writing does not start with words.
Yeah.
Even in this Pilgrim book, it was more, an image or a series of images that I was pursuing. And, I have some ideas for writing fiction. I don't know what will come of it, but, my idea right now is more an image, and I want to capture that.
Yeah.
But that comes before the words.
Yeah. By the way, my favorite image from your book is when I can't remember which of the pilgrims, one of the men, when he came home, he finally made it home, and his fellow monks were at prayer and didn't hear him knocking on the door, and it was the dog that greeted him, the monastery dog. I love it.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Isn't that how we want to come home?
Yeah. I don't even know what it, and I don't know what that. I don't know what that means, right? The image itself is just so beautiful that our temptation is to go turn that into some kind of metaphor or something. But I just love the image,
right.
and the image itself of the dog. Well, and I also love that the monks were too busy praying to welcome him, and then when they were done, they were very glad to see him, right?
Yeah, I love that.
But there was a dog ready for him.
Maybe it means we should all get a COVID puppy.
That's right. Yes.
No. But you're right. It's a beautiful image that we don't have to just dissect endlessly.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, I always end these conversations with the question, who are the writers who make you want to write?
Well, so a true confession is when I was young, very young, Star Wars first made me want to write.
Really?
Yeah. Well, so growing up, like in middle school or high school, my best friend and I wrote Star Wars fan fiction. So that's kind of maybe, I don't know if it's where it all began, but that was a lot of fun. But these days, in terms of themes and ideas, a couple of writers I really love are Susanna Clarke, who wrote Piranesi.
This book is coming up so often.
Oh boy, yeah,
people, and I have not read it, and I've got to do that.
Love it. It's just a beautiful talk about imagery. There's a beautiful sense of spiritual presence in the book. And then another writer I really like is Muriel Barbary, who wrote The Elegance of the Hedgehog.
Okay.
She wrote it in French. It's been translated into English. The translation is really, really good.
Okay.
And she also writes just about wonderful themes of healing and deep connection coming out of isolation and being able to experience friendship and connection. It's just funny and wise and wonderful.
Oh, great. That's another one that I've heard of and have not read. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. And then just sometimes to give a shout out to two writers I know, as an historian, whether I want to write historical fiction one day or to continue writing nonfiction, I want to bring the past alive. And so two writers that help me think about that are Suzanne Wolfe and Candace Robb. And they both write historical mysteries and other books that just kind of show me how to make the past come alive and how to use imagery. Yeah. So to give a shout out to them. So
do they specialize in a particular era?
Candace Robb specializes in medieval mysteries in medieval York. And that's so wonderful and fun. And Suzanne Wolfe writes Elizabethan mysteries now, but she's also the writer of Confessions of X, which is a novel based on St. Augustine's concubine.
Oh, really?
A novelistic interpretation of what her life might have been like. And, that was just really opened up, thinking about the past to me in a new way. So,
right. Yeah. The past is a foreign country, and yet there were still people who lived there.
That's right. They are, right. And that helps me approach them as people.
Yeah. Okay, real quickly. We haven't talked about Marjorie Kemp enough. And so just tell me just a little bit about, she had 14 children. So she was a pilgrim, one of the three pilgrims you write about.
Right.
And just real quickly, tell me. So that was supposed to be the last question, but I want to hear more about Marjorie Kemp. Okay. Just for a minute.
She's an interesting figure. She was a laywoman. Mm-hmm. So unlike the other pilgrims, she wasn't a priest or a cleric or in the church. She was a laywoman who did have 14 children and yet had, God, and a mystic. So she had a deeply spiritual life. And apparently God placed on her heart, charged her to go to Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, is it a good thing or a bad thing that she left 14 children behind to go to Jerusalem? Mm-hmm. And we don't really know is the thing. We don't know if she left them in wonderful care or, so we don't know enough, I think, to truly judge, but she gets a lot of flack for that. Uh-huh. And it's interesting to think about, she left us, this beautiful autobiography and took this journey to Jerusalem where she had a vision of the crucified Christ mm-hmm. that supposedly changed her life.
Yeah.
And yet she left, her children at home to pursue this life as a mystic and sort of a contemplative. So she's interesting. She also did not get along with her fellow travelers.
Yeah, that was so interesting.
They clashed and they ended up abandoning her partway through her journey. And then she met up with them again and then they abandoned her again. And so
the same ones that abandoned her on the way home too.
Yes. Well, yeah. When they finally got back to Venice, they said, we wouldn't travel with you for 100 pounds again. And so she just made her way on to do further pilgrimages. So was she a difficult person? It seems like she might have been, but she has this, of the three pilgrims I talk about, she's the one who's most, fervent and personal about wanting to have this experience of Jesus. So it's a real tension there.
Yeah. Well, Lisa Deam, thank you so much for being. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope we can talk again soon. Maybe when you finally get around to writing your next book, you can come back.
Might be slow, but thank you so much.
I'll still be here.
Good. This has been great. Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
The Habit membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.